Hi guys, welcome to Little Wicket Railway. I'm Rob, and in this video I'll share with you the 5 biggest mistakes I made when building Little Wicket. I made a lot more than 5, but these are probably the ones I regret the most because they either cost me a lot of money or a lot of time. Before we start, if you'd like to support the channel then please subscribe, I would really appreciate it, and if you find this video useful then please give it a like. Right, let's get started. Number 1, access all areas. You need to be able to access all areas of your layout for doing things like scenic work, and you can guarantee if something's going to go wrong, it'll be in that one area that's inaccessible. My board is 4 feet wide or 120 centimeters, which is great for having large radius curves. However, my arms aren't 4 feet long and the layout is pushed up against this brick wall. So if I need to reach the other side of the layout, I need to pull the whole thing out, crawl under and then squeeze up between the wall and the board. When I build the next layout, I'm going to make sure that the board width is 2 to 3 feet so I can easily reach it from one side, or if it's going to be wider, I need to be able to get round to all sides. I've also got a hidden area over here and it is a nightmare to access. I can barely get my hand under, and to make things worse, it's quite a complex area of track. It's got 4 points under there and quite a bit of electronics too. I did make it so the whole thing does lift off, so I can get under there if I really have to, but every time I do that, all the scenics move around and it's a real faff. In future, if I have hidden areas that are pretty inaccessible, I'm going to make sure the track work there is really simple to minimise the risk of derailments, and I'm also not going to put any important electronics there. 2. Solenoid point motors. I've moaned about point motors before in previous videos, but I think using solenoid point motors rather than servo motors is one of my most expensive mistakes. There are around 25 points on Little Wicket, and I've got a mix of Gauge Master solenoid point motors under the board and Hornby surface mounted point motors on top of the board. And the reason I've got a mix is because I was stupid when I put this together and didn't think about where my points were and where the framing for the board is. So if I've got a surface mounted point motor, it's because I put a point on top of Ord and batten. The Gauge Master point motors cost around £4 to £5 each, and the Hornby surface mounted ones cost £9 to £10 each. And each of those is connected to a Hornby accessory decoder which contains capacitor discharge units, and they cost between £35 and £40 each. I've got 6 of those accessory decoders, so when you do the maths, it probably works out at around £15 to £20 per point motor. Plus, the Gauge Master point motors need soldering, they don't move at a realistic speed, and you need to wait for the CDU to recharge before you can fire them. I really wish I'd used servo point motors because they would have cost me around £4 each. Plus, there would be no soldering, they're more reliable, they move more realistically, and you can switch them backwards and forwards as quickly as you like without having to wait for anything to recharge. If you're interested in seeing how to use servos for point motors, then I'll put a link to a video up here. 3. Ballasting points. This is a bit of an embarrassing one and a very time-consuming one to fix, but basically whilst I was ballasting I managed to get glue and ballast into the moving parts of the point, which stopped them from working. I did this to a number of points on the layout. It was a really silly mistake, but in my defence it was my first time ballasting. I used the technique where you put the ballast on the track work and then you get a 50-50 mix of PVA and water into a dropper, and then drop that onto the ballast, it soaks in, and then leave it for 24 hours and everything sets hard. When I came back the next day, I realised that my stupid solenoid point motors wouldn't fire anymore. And on closer inspection, I'd basically glued my points shut, and that took absolutely ages to fix. I'm talking a week of evenings solely dedicated to chipping small bits of ballast out from between the blades. So next time I ballast points, I'm not going to use the dropper method. What I'm going to do is get a fine paintbrush, dip it in some PVA and paint the glue between the sleepers where I want the ballast to go, and I'm really going to take my time over it. Then you sprinkle the ballast on top, only the ballast touching the glue will stick, and the rest of the ballast that's loose on top can just be hoovered off. This gives you so much more control where your ballast goes, and you shouldn't end up with anything jamming the mechanism. 4. Steep gradients. I think having height on a layout makes it more interesting, but I didn't realise how sensitive some locomotives are to gradients. A 4% or 1 in 25 gradient doesn't sound like very much, but it's pretty much the recommended maximum on a model railway layout. 2.65% is the maximum gradient you'll find on the mainline railway in the UK, and that's at the Licky Incline, and engines often require bankers to help them get up there. Don't get me wrong, some models will handle 4% just fine, particularly your heavy diesels where both bogies are driven. But some locomotives, no matter what you do, will ever be able to handle getting up that steep gradient. On Little Wicket, I've got this 4% gradient coming up round here, and I use the Woodland Scenic polystyrene inclines to make that. Then in the centre, I've got a 5 or 6% gradient going down into Harborne Station, and I very quickly realised that some engines would make it up the 4% gradient, go round the branch line, come down into the station in the middle, but then not be able to get back up the slope, which is why I've kind of got this escape route back onto the main line here. Because it's meant to be a branch line, I never intended for big trains to be going up there, so most of my 060s with a couple of coaches handle it just fine. But on my next layout, I'm going to try and reduce the gradient to a maximum of 2%, I think, and that will pretty much guarantee that most things will be able to make it up with a decent sized train. It's always a good idea before putting a gradient in to check that the locomotives you want to go up there can actually handle it. Charlie from Chadwick recently did a really good video about gradients in relation to his Helix, and he also tested a couple of products that claim to improve the locomotive's ability to get up them, including Bullfrog Snot and DCC Concepts Power Base. So if you're interested in gradients, then go check that out. 5. Block detection. I always wanted an element of automation on the layout because that sort of thing interests me, and I'd read about how you need to split the layout into blocks, and the computer would know which trains were occupying which blocks, and that's how it would work out what to automate. These blocks need to be electrically isolated from each other, so usually using insulated rail joiners, and each block would have a block occupancy current sensor. When I looked into this further, I found the cheapest block occupancy detector was around £10 that was commercially available, and that was just far too expensive. I was going to have loads of blocks on here that I would need to fit these sensors to, so I decided not to go ahead with it. And because I wasn't going ahead with it, I thought, why bother breaking this up into blocks? I didn't bother isolating any sections of track. Subsequently, I discovered that the Model Engineering Railway Group, MERG, have a block occupancy current sensor for £3. And for that price, okay, you've got to solder it together yourself. It makes fitting them to this layout far more affordable. But if I wanted to create blocks on my layout now, I'd have to do a lot of cutting of rails, and it would be a huge amount of work, so it will have to wait until Little Wicket gets a rebuild. My advice to you is, even if you're not thinking about doing automation now, but there is the slightest chance you might want to in the future, then build blocks into your layout when you build it, and make sure you've got the wiring in place to accommodate the sensors. If you want to see how block occupancy using current sensors works with JMRI, then I'll put a video up here. So those are what I think the 5 biggest mistakes I made when building Little Wicket. There were plenty more than 5, so I might share some more with you in future. If you've made any mistakes or you've got any good advice, then please leave your words of wisdom in the comment section below. Please support the channel by subscribing, I would really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I will hopefully see you again soon.